computer. So you can right click on that web page, click on view page info, and then all the cookies that are being created by that particular web page on your machine gets displayed. So you can click on show cookies and site data. It will show you more information about each cookie. So that is how you can see all the cookies that are set or created on your computer by a particular web page. How to protect yourself from cookies? We have already discussed this. If you use a private browsing window in Mozilla Firefox or an incognito window in Google Chrome, then you can prevent a website, any website, from reading the cookies on your computer. But please remember, a common misconception that people have is that if they use a private browsing window, then their IP address is protected. That is not at all true. Private browsing or incognito window does not hide your IP, does not hide your location. It only prevents a website from accessing the cookies of your computer or any application data or browsing data on your computer. Alright, so now that we understand what cookies are, let us start with the topic of session hijacking. So what exactly is session hijacking and why is it so important? See, whenever you log into your favorite online account like Facebook or Google, the following steps take place. Step number 1, you open login screen. So it could be, say, Gmail or Facebook. Step number 2, you enter username password to log in, right? You enter your own username password and you click on login button. Next, what happens is username and password that you entered will be transmitted or will be sent from your computer to website for authentication. And usually this is a post method HTTPS secure connection. So the username password cannot be stolen using a data sniffer. Next, what happens is Facebook checks username password. So Facebook checks username password, and if it is correct, it will create a unique session ID just for you. It will store it in a cookie and send cookie and store it on your computer. So usually these are the 4 steps that take place whenever you log into any online account. You type the username password, it is then sent to the remote website. The remote website will check your username password. If it is correct, it will create a unique session ID. So every single user that is currently connected to a particular website may be given a unique session ID that helps Facebook or Gmail or ICICI Bank to differentiate between multiple users. If every user across the world has a unique session ID, it's very easy for that server or Facebook or Gmail or ICICI Bank to differentiate between the users. Now imagine the following scenario. You and I are friends. Secretly, I don't like you. I want to hijack your Gmail account, for example. So what do? I wait for you to log into Gmail. I run a data sniffer on my computer. And we are on the same network. So data sniffer should be able to record the cookie that is containing your session ID, which is sent from Google to your computer. But actually this does not work. Why? Because Gmail normally is HTTPS. So it's secure, SSL encrypted kind of connection. So when I use a data sniffer, I'm not able to record your cookie. And if I don't record your cookie, I'm not able to find out your session ID. And if I don't know your session ID, I cannot hijack your account. So what I essentially need to do is get physical access to your computer. and I can then copy your cookie physically, paste it in the cookie folder in my browser, and if I then go to gmail.com, what will happen? Gmail will check if there is a cookie or not. And yes, there will be a cookie, and Gmail will find that cookie and will try to read that cookie, and that cookie contains your computer session ID. So what will happen is I will get logged into your Gmail account because I have that unique session ID that belongs to you. And that unique session ID is stored on a cookie on my machine. So Google thinks that I am you and logs me into your account without me having to enter your username and password. Which is why most email accounts have this option that whenever you log in from a new computer, if there is no proper cookie in terms of identifying that you have logged in before, it will ask you for a second step of authentication, or it will send you an SMS notification and so on. But essentially that is what session hijacking is all about. If you are able to steal somebody else's session ID by stealing their cookie, then you can hijack their session, hijack their online account. So that is what cookie stealing or session hijacking is all about. So in session hijacking, the attacker or the criminal takes control and spies over an authenticated session between two computers, that is basically the victim's computer and say gmail.com or facebook.com, by stealing a valid session ID. Typically, whenever a connection is established between two computers, the authentication happens only in the first step. Once a session has been authenticated, then again the username password is not required, because the unique session ID of that user gets stored in a cookie, and the cookie is then sent to the victim's computer. If a criminal steals this session ID, he can spy upon the confidential data exchange or transmission or account that the victim has on the website. So typically what happens when a user logs into their account? Step number 1 is that user types username and password in browser and clicks on the login button. Step number 2 is that the username and password are sent to the website like Facebook, Gmail, Hotmail, whatever, for authentication purposes. If the username password are not correct, then that's the end of the transaction. But if they are correct, then the user gets authenticated. Step number 3, the website will create a unique session ID or session token for the user. Every logged in or every authenticated user around the world may have a unique session ID, which is then stored in a cookie and sent to the victim's computer. And the user is able to browse the website. And if it's a session cookie, even if the user, after some time goes to the same website, he is still logged into his account. So what is a session ID? A session ID is usually a long, randomly generated string that is used to identify a user interacting with a particular website. For example, session IDs are used to remember an authenticated user and his activities on a particular website. Usernames usually last permanently or for a very long period of time. However, session IDs expire at the end of a session or transaction. So if you log out, if you click on the log out button, then your session ID is no longer valid. A website will generate a hash value called session token from the session ID to identify a specific user. The session token is stored on the user's machine in the form of a cookie. If a criminal steals the victim's session token, then he can successfully hijack the victim's session and pretend to be the victim. So how do you find out somebody else's session ID or session token? If the victim and the criminal are on the same LAN, then the criminal can use a data sniffer to steal the victim's cookie when the website is sending the cookie to the victim. However, this will not work if the connection between the victim and the website is SSL encrypted or HTTPS enabled, which is normally the case in Gmail, Facebook, and so on. So in that case, you cannot steal the cookie like this. But let's assume that there is a website which does not use HTTPS. Then how do you steal the cookies of somebody else's computer or user? You basically run data sniffer and then use the following filter. filter is frame contains cookie. Frame contains cookie, and as you are searching for that, it will then show you only those data packets which represent some cookie that has been transmitted on the same network. Another way to filter for cookies in a data sniffer is to type http.cookie. http.cookie. So you have frame contains cookie, then you have http.cookie as well. And yet another way in which you can steal somebody else's cookie is by sending them a link. So it is possible to post a malicious link in an online forum or website, or send it to the victim via email or chat, such that as soon as the victim clicks on that link, whichever website that they're currently logged into, that cookie will be sent to the attacker's website. This does not work in every browser, but you can try it out, you can modify it, you can play around with it. So I'll give all of you a couple of minutes to write this down. So it's a simple JavaScript or HTML code that you can use to basically steal somebody else's cookie. So how do you steal somebody else's cookie via email? What are the steps that you follow? Step number 1, the attacker creates an HTML email and inserts the malicious link into the email by modifying the source code of the email. Step 2, you send that email to the victim and wait for the victim to log into his account and open that email. Step 3, the victim clicks on the malicious link and the current session's cookie gets stolen and is sent to the attacker's website. Step 4, the attacker runs a simple CGI script on their website to accept the cookie stolen from the victim's computer. Similarly, you can do the same thing through an online blog or forum, where you can post the link through the comment field of the website, and if somebody clicks on the link, if they're logged into some online account, the current cookie gets stolen and gets transmitted. You can also perform brute force attacks to steal somebody else's session ID. Step number 1, the attacker connects to the victim website multiple times to record the session IDs that it normally generates for users. And this can be done using a data sniffer. So you use a data sniffer to record the session ID that the website has created for you, and you do this multiple times. And after some time, you can figure out a logical algorithm or pattern that the website is following to create those session IDs. Step number 2, the attacker studies the session IDs that are generated, looking for a particular pattern. It could be a size, repetition, mathematical formula, format, and so on. Step number 3, attacker uses brute force tools to guess the session ID of the victim client. The more educated and logical the guess, the better are the chances that you'll be able to successfully guess somebody else's session ID. The attacker, once they have guessed the correct session ID, can pretend to be the victim and will be logged into the victim's account. You also have the HTTP referrer attack that we have discussed earlier in this course, which I won't discuss again. Actually, let me just quickly go through it. The header of every HTTP request has something known as the referrer that represents where the user has come from. If you remember, I had discussed this earlier. Step number 1, assume that the victim is on the target website whose session ID the attacker wants to steal. Step number 2, the attacker will send a link to the victim and tempt the victim to click on that link. If the victim clicks on the link and visits the attacker's website, then the attacker will be able to view the HTTP referrer URL, that is the URL of the website that the victim was on before he clicked on that link, or before the victim came to the attacker website. And in this case, the previous website is the target URL, and the URL may actually contain the session ID of the user as well. Just to demonstrate this, you can go to this website wap.w3schools.com/jsref/prop_doc_referrer.asp. I'll give you a minute to write this down if you're interested. So when you go to this website, let us see what gets displayed. So there's a simple JavaScript called document.referrer that tells you the previous website that the victim was on. So there's a demonstration on this website. Click on try it, and it tells you the previous website that I was on, which is the W3 Schools website. Similarly, if you remember, I had discussed this tool earlier as well called ref control, which allows you to hide your HTTP referrer while you're surfing the internet. So some more quick examples of how to steal somebody else's cookie or how to hijack somebody else's session. There's an attack called cross-site request forgery attack. It is a type of attack where the criminal makes an authenticated user perform an action that he normally would not perform. This is done by an attacker by making the victim's browser send requests to the website that it normally would never send. Step number 1, imagine the victim is logged into his bank account. And the bank account creates a new session and stores the session token in a cookie and sends it to the victim's computer. Simultaneously, the victim unknowingly visits the attacker's malicious website. It could be the attacker's blog. And the attacker uses simple HTML and JavaScript to send a request to the trusted website, that is the bank, using the victim's valid session. For example, let us assume that the attacker wants to transfer 1 lakh rupees out of the victim's account. Then the attacker will somehow make the victim click on the following link. It is hsbc.com something. When the victim clicks on that link, the same credentials that the victim has when the victim has logged into his bank account are still applicable if the cookie is still valid. So that is what you're trying to kind of misuse here. You could create a link which says hot girl. So the victim will get very tempted into clicking on that link. But actually when they click on the link, they are taken to the HSBC website, and if the session ID is still valid, if the cookie is still valid, 1 lakh rupees will be transferred out of the victim's bank account. Since victim is logged into the trusted website and has a valid session ID and cookie, as a result, when the above link is secretly executed by the attacker on the victim's computer, the victim's browser actually sends a request to the trusted website. Another example is the session fixation attack. The attacker finds out that the trusted website uses session IDs to identify authenticated users. The attacker finds the format of the session ID that is normally used by the trusted website. Step 2, attacker sends a spoofed email or phishing email to the victim with a link to the trusted website with some fixed session ID in the same format as what normally the website uses. The victim clicks on the link, connects to the website, logs into the website with their own username and password, but using the session ID that the attacker had fixed for the victim. Now the attacker on their computer connects to the trusted website by clicking on the same link which was sent to the victim. So the same session ID gets used. And now, if the website is not checking where that same session ID is being accessed from, the attacker will be given access to the victim's computer. Another example of a session fixation attack, the attacker logs into trusted website using his own username and password and records the session ID that was generated. Let us assume the session ID was 3290153. Now this step is primarily executed to figure out the type and format of the session ID that the website is using. Step 2, the attacker sends a spoofed email or phishing email to the victim with a link to the trusted website using the session ID that was created for the attacker's account. Victim clicks on the link, connects to the website, logs into the website with their own username and password using the fixed session ID that the attacker sent. And now the attacker types the same link in their browser, and if the website is not checking for cookies or not checking who is accessing that particular session ID, then the attacker will be given access to the victim's computer. There's another attack known as session ID timeout attack. Most web applications or websites have a logout button. So normally if the user clicks on logout, the session ID expires and is no longer valid. But most people never use this logout button. What happens if a user does not click on the logout button and just closes the browser window instead? If the web application or the website does not have an automatic timeout feature for session IDs, then the same computer can be misused a few hours later by a criminal to access the user's account. And since the session ID did not time out and the user did not log out from their account, the attacker will be given access to the victim's online account. So what are some advantages of using session hijacking to take over somebody else's account as compared to password cracking? Session hijacking cannot be stopped by CAPTCHA or account lockouts. Usually transmitted in plain text via cookies or URL get methods without encryption. And generally a lot of websites use weak algorithms to generate session IDs. So what are some tools that you can use to perform session hijacking or cookie stealing? We have a software called Firesheep. It's a Mozilla Firefox browser add-on. I think recently they stopped supporting it. It's become obsolete now. There's another software called Idiocy. And then you have Hamster and Ferret. Hamster and Ferret. There's also a technique called surf jacking. You can read more about it online. And there's a software called Cookie Digger. McAfee has come out with this software. It tests the implementation of cookies. And then you have Google Chrome browser add-ons or browser apps like Edit This Cookie, which allow you to edit any of the cookies in your browser, or Swap My Cookies if you want to use multiple accounts on the same browser. So if you have multiple Gmail accounts and if you want to quickly swap from one Gmail account to another, you can do that by just swapping your cookie using Swap My Cookies browser app. So before we wrap up, we're pretty much out of time. I wanted to quickly give you some solutions that you can implement against session hijacking. Always use post methods. Do not transmit session IDs unless you're using HTTPS or SSL encryption. Do not use easy to guess or predict session IDs. Never reuse session IDs without authenticating the user again. Expire session IDs automatically when the window is closed or based on a timeout function. Provide the logout option to users. Map session IDs to IP addresses so that even if a criminal steals a victim's session ID, they will not be able to hijack the victim's account. You can also use out-of-band transaction verification through SMS or phone calls. Finally, one last software called URL Scan. It is a security software. It blocks specific HTTP requests that may have malform or malicious requests in it. So it's a good software to run if you're using an IIS server on your website. So on that note, we pretty much come to the end of this particular lecture. This was a pretty long lecture and I covered a lot of different topics. We discussed a bunch of web hacking topics, right from tab napping to cross-site scripting to HTTP query hacking or query request hacking or query string hacking, then cookie stealing and session hijacking. Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. I think I took a few minutes extra today. Normally we end a few minutes early. Today we have taken extra time. I hope all of you enjoyed today's lecture. Until the next time, this is Ankit Faria signing off.